Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today and for what I'm sure will be a really interesting and engaging conversation about equity in CS education and how we can all work to create more inclusive spaces for students in this field. Hi, I'm Jake. I'm the Executive Director at CSTA, and thank you, Susan, for that nice intro and bio. I also want to say thank you overall to the organizers for setting up this entire event and this panel and making sure that equity was a central part of what we're discussing throughout the day. And I want to give a special shout out to the Connecticut CSTA chapter, who is key in making this happen. It's an incredible group, and if you're in this conference and not yet a member, please join today. And I also want to remind everyone that you can submit questions for our panel in the conference app. I'm going to be checking in there before the end of the conversation to do my best to answer all of your questions and make sure that we're talking about what matters to you all watching. So to kick us off, I'd like each of our panelists to very quickly introduce themselves. Ruth, can you kick us off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. I'm Ruth Farmer. I am Chief Evangelist at CS4ALL, and we're the national organization welcoming everybody to the table for computer science education.
Awesome. Thanks, Ruth. Nisreen, can you go next?
Sure. Good morning. I'm Nisreen Cain. I'm Senior Vice President for Babel Street. Babel Street is a cyber intelligence company, and I direct the engineering team, work on the hiring part of the team, and building and mentoring the team. I was one of the early founders in the company, so I've built the software, and I've been working in software since I was 10 years old. My background is in academia, so I understand a little bit of the educational side of things, and I bring some of the industrial side of things too. I'm delighted to be here and looking forward to learning more about the challenges everyone has.
Great. And Lynn, can you go next?
Hi, everyone. My name is Lynn Diaz. I'm the director at the Constellations Center for Equity and Computing at Georgia Tech. Our mission is to democratize computing education, and I just want to start by giving a huge shout out to all the educators across our nation who are giving it their best to provide students, the best educational experiences under every circumstance we can imagine during this pandemic. I'm a former middle school and high school teacher, and it's important for me to say that, teachers deserve all the praise and support we can give them right now. And this is the time to be at our best to learn how to improve on American education. Of course, I believe computing education is essential in doing that. And so really appreciate the opportunity to be on this wonderful panel, and I'm looking forward to these discussions.
Thank you, Lynn. And Ron, can you introduce yourself?
No problem. Hello, everyone. Ron Summers, Executive Director of Computer Science Education for the New York City Department of Education. We are what powers the CS4ALL initiative in New York City in collaboration with our founders, which are part of the Public-Private Founders Committee, which is actually headed by Fred Wilson. Our work is all around equity, thinking about making sure that we can actually reach a point where we say we have reached CS4ALL, where students of color, female, and students across the spectrum have access to computer science that empowers them to change our tomorrow.
Thanks, Ron. And I think that's probably, your introduction perfectly leads into the first question I have. I think many of us feel this way, but over the last 6 months, it is starting to feel a bit like equity is turning into an education buzzword that has really lost all meaning. It's used in so many different ways. So to start this panel, I'd love if we could define a little bit more clearly what we're talking about when we say we want to work towards equity in the context of CS education. So Ron, can you share a little bit about how your team in New York City has been really thoughtful on what this means to you?
One, equity as a buzzword hurts my soul because equity itself is a lot bigger than what I think the country has defined it as, which has really been around diversity and reach. Diversity and reach has been a great approach to think about the tech gap and how we want more people in seats. But it doesn't really get at the heart of what's really happening, which is a tech issue, but also an education issue around, are our systems, are our classrooms, and are the doorways equitable where that technology gap can get into questions like, are people able to, why don't they stay? And are different experiences represented so that the solutions are actually thinking about others than just a very exclusive group of creators? So let's think about equity also from how New York City is doing it. We're really clear that equity is around 3 specific approaches, which we define as exposure, access, and belonging. We think that exposure to computer science at an early age is extremely important. We think this idea of being strategic when it comes to access points and increasing that access is very important. But this last piece around belonging, which is not I should belong, it's really around the culture of building belonging, which is affirming and also inclusive, is a huge part, because no matter what amazing curriculum you have, it has to be supported by the approach of thinking about students of color, females, my Ls, my students with disabilities. Do they actually feel like they have access? Do they feel like they have exposure? Do they feel like they have belonging in computer science education? So take it even further. CS equity is simply equity in the realm of education. It's not new. It's not breathtaking or brand new for anyone else. A district, as a teacher, as a school leader, asking yourself some questions around, is computer science equitable in my building? And do students have access to it? Will they get exposure to it? And will they be able to keep on going to be able to be successful and create solutions for tomorrow?
Thanks, Ron. I really love the way you highlight the focus on how we can think about the systems that are playing out throughout schools, and the focus on making sure that we're thinking at that level. And Nisreen, I know that these same challenges apply in the corporate sphere and in industry, and I'd love if you could share a little bit from your perspective what it means in your role to work towards equity.
Yeah, thanks. Ron really touched on a lot of the points and the pain points that we have in the industry, because as we look at hiring new resources and getting more people on board for our team, we look for diversity. We want to include more people because in the corporate world, we started to understand more and more that having a diverse team means a richer product that reaches more audience, especially when we're talking about applications, whether it's a social network or mobile applications or anything like that. So some of the things that we look for in the industry, and as a hiring manager, sometimes is like, who can diverse my team? Who can I bring to my culture that can shake the status quo and build something more exciting for the team? Can bring a different perspective on things. Now, that alone is not, working towards equity in the corporate world, but we're starting to understand that we can't build better products without diversity in our teams. So some of the things that we look for on the teams, and that I start to see in a lot of the different industries and a lot of companies, is that how can we build that into our culture? So a lot of times when we are looking at ourselves, it takes a lot of courage on the leadership side to see where we're breaking things down and how we're not attracting that talent that we're looking for, and how we can diversify our teams a little bit more. And when we start looking at these the issues, and we hold a mirror to ourselves and to our team, and we start looking at how can we break these things down, we start seeing where the flaws in our systems are. One of the things that we've done at Babel Street is, most importantly, is creating a cultural environment that is safe for everybody to speak up to bring up the issues and to connect. So we're providing a culture of safety where people can bring up these issues and say, here's how I cannot participate or I can't speak up. And from these actions and from these retrospectives, we started understanding that for all of us to be connected and to, maintain that safe culture, we needed to build career development plans for everyone on the team, and for that to be merit-based. So it takes away from, we provide opportunities and we build an environment where everyone can succeed, and we provide them the tools to succeed, from educational tools, conferences, participating in conversations on the business side, or participation in conversation on the architecture, whether you're a new person, especially for new people, especially for people that are coming from college or in our mentorship programs. We emphasize mentorship and learning, and that helps both sides learn from each other. And so we try to pair people in that direction. But really, to work towards equity in the corporate world, we need to establish, first of all, have courage to look and be aware of the issues, take actions on a lot of these issues, because without action, like awareness without action is not going to get us anywhere. And then from that point, build a culture of safety where people can speak up about the issues and build actions toward these topics, and build a strategy around making sure that we're held accountable as leaders and to execute on those actions and move forward.
Thank you, and I really appreciate this being the way you highlighted the need to sort of hold up a mirror and look back at ourselves on what needs to change within our systems. I think it is essential to remember to frame it that way. Lynn, I know that your team has done really outstanding work supporting teachers in creating those safe communities and spaces to dig into conversations around equity and race in the classroom. And I'd love if you could share some key things teachers can do to create a more inclusive CS environment.
Yeah, so first I want to emphasize the importance of, the belief that equity must exist in every single pillar of policy and behavior in a school system. And honestly, we don't see this enough because it is hard to do. But in schools that have obtained like a higher level of consensus about equity, which by extension allows for higher quality instruction and expectations, we see things like incorporating examples from different cultures, making connections to students' everyday lives. And I think more importantly, building this safe learning environment to participate in classroom discussions without fear of reprisals or negative comments, particularly for students of color who, data shows that are disciplined at far higher rates than their white counterparts. So what we've done at the Constellation Center is we've taken that research and, we not into like your STEM academies that already have resources to succeed, but we've taken that directly into schools in low-income communities in Metro Atlanta and built the relationships we needed to be able to prioritize computer science education. Again, emphasizing the importance of belief systems in order to make access to computing knowledge and skills a part of that system, because this is, this is the hard thing for the general public to deal with. Is honestly, these schools have many other things to prioritize. I mean, they need to make sure kids are safe, that they're fed, they can get to school and back home in one piece. We cannot negate those challenges. Instead, what we've done is we've acknowledged that those attributes in these communities are factors that create barriers for students to be afforded quality opportunities into STEM and computing. So in the classroom, what we do first is focus on teachers. We conduct planning sessions. We deploy a combination of different types of coaching approaches, and it's all about building trust. And it's not an evaluation. We're not there to do that. But rather, we've been able to increase teaching efficacy over the last couple of years by building content knowledge and practicing research-based and effective pedagogy that works for them and their students. And I think really importantly, this has been able to empower the teachers, to empower the students to believe in themselves, and using computing knowledge to learn about the world around them, the ethics of computing in our justice system, the bias in algorithms that assist or deconstructs their community. Those kinds of issues are important for students in these communities. And we do this in parallel, Jake. We ensure that all students are humanized and not dictated. We value their voices. We help to integrate students' interests and cultural norms in designing tasks and problems and projects to validate their identities. And we show them how they can be empowered by computing knowledge to address issues in their schools and in their communities.
God, I want to go to a school that you're working in, Lynn. That sounds incredible. Thank you for sharing that. So next, I want to turn to Ruth, and we've sort of talked about the school level, and we've talked really high level at the system space. But I know that CS4ALL has been working on specific resources to support district teams through their script process. In fact, I want to give a quick shout out to one of CSTA's equity fellows, Jackie Corcelli from Connecticut, who's done amazing work expanding script workshops in Connecticut. Can you share what folks at the district level should be thinking about on this front?
Sure. So one of the things that I think everyone is experiencing right now is there's just a lot coming at you. And the nice thing about script is it builds a team. So, Lynn was talking about the individual teachers and the way they are behaving in their classrooms, but a teacher can't succeed without an entire district supporting them and being part of the team. So the first experience in script is going through this visions activity where you're coming to consensus as a district, and Lynn mentioned consensus as a district as to why you're teaching computer science and how it fits into the values and drivers in your community. And I think that's a really important thing. And we realized a while back that there were a lot of mistakes being made in that we're out here shouting about 500,000 jobs, but the reality is a second grade teacher or a principal in an elementary school is not worried about jobs. They have other concerns that they're focused on. And so we need to really think about what are the drivers and the why you're doing this. And you also need to build a district-wide team. And going back to what Ron said, it's really about systems change. If there are incentives in the system that are not, that are counter to your goals, you need to root those out. If there are key factors that are, say, keeping teachers from getting certified or keeping teachers from getting professional development credit for certain things, you need to work out those bugs within your system so that those teachers can succeed. And so this effort to train lots and lots of teachers often falters because the system can't accept those great teachers into a platform that will give them an opportunity for success. So I really encourage districts to take a holistic view of the experience because we also need equity for CS teachers because they're kind of new to this world. It's not been around for 40, 50 years like science teachers. And we really want to make sure that they're getting all of the same components of access and belonging and equity that we hope for our kids.
Thanks, Ruth, and I really appreciate you calling out the difference for CS teachers. I used to joke that the CS department in my school had perfect vertical planning in everything we did at all times because there was only a single CS teacher, and I'm sure there are folks out there who are in that same environment. And actually, I think that sets up this question of we're talking about making big systems change and building this consensus from the district level down into classrooms. Ron, from your perspective and knowing that we have both district leaders and school leaders in the audience, What can senior leadership in a district do to support school leaders who have a million things on their plate in implementing this work and doing so in an equitable way?
I think, as has been referenced, you have to take a really deep look in the mirror, right? We know that as educators, we're always juggling 20 things. And sometimes those 20 things have nothing to do with our classroom instruction. You have to take a look in the mirror and think about, what does your community need? Where do you want to go? And then you think about, where does CS education fit into those goals? Because if you're looking at CS education as a separate solution, it's not going to work. It's not organic. It's not part of it. But when you think about the value add that CS education brings to the other subject areas, then you can actually start to pinpoint, where do some of the outputs of CS education match core curriculum? Where does it match up with a very specific district goal that I have for school A versus school B? That's when you start creating, and I'm going to reference National CS4ALL here, you start creating those ecosystems that can thrive. Building the school team and thinking about, how is that school team not only going to think about CS education and equity, but how is that school team also going to be diverse and actually have representation so that the school team looks like the student body? How are you going to think about your connections to your 3 to 4 year goals in a school as a school leader, right? What are you building in your building? If your instructional priorities around English, how are you going to power computer science through English? And then also, as a school leader, you've got to really take the time to start thinking about, how does your value proposition for your building, the core values that are supposed to echo through your hallways, how does that also live in computer science? So I think organically, and I don't think there's a process or a checkbox for this. You've got to sit down, put the truth on the table, think about where you want to go, and then turn that into either metrics or systems that you can actually live by to be able to check progress and see where you are. It's a long process. It is a hard process. Learning CS as a classroom teacher is hard. Figuring out how to implement it over 3 to 4 to 5 years to be able to reach your equity goals in computer science is even harder. But you gotta make sure that you are in this game and you start planning earlier than later, because there is no instant solution to equity and CS in your building. You gotta learn how to do it. You gotta make some mistakes, and you gotta keep going, because the only group that suffers when we don't put the time in are students and our community.
Thanks, Ron. And sorry, this isn't a planned question, but based on your answer, I just want to follow up. You talked about being able to set these goals and metrics over multiple years that we can work towards. Can you share some of the metrics that you've seen schools in New York City working towards?
Yeah, so I mean, there are a few different metrics. Some are within the realm of diversity and reach. So of course we have things like teachers trained, as Ruth said. It's a great metric, doesn't necessarily represent equity, but you have other metrics you can look at where you think of just everything from your student demographics to population. So you may have a CS program, but is that CS program actually reaching everyone equitably? Are you thinking about the strategies so that there are introductory experiences so that if I'm a student and I am a Black man, if I'm walking through that building and I'm 17 years old and I see a flyer in the building that says APCS, am I going to feel like that's the class for me, or am I going to refer to the history of the building where that's the class for other people? You have to really think about those touch points, and then you can start thinking about, in year 1, we had an intro experience and we had 500 students who showed up. Year 2, we had an intermediate experience and a class, and those same students who signed up in year 1 who went to that thing have now turned into students in the intermediate experience. You've got to really think about how you're going to connect the data, because you can't escape it, right? And think about how you're going to measure success so that you can stop and pivot if needed, or maybe even give yourself a pat on the back because things are working. And now you can actually raise that bar of expectations in your building to aim for something that is even greater. But it's really all around the time. It's about being creative, and set some metrics, even if they're not the perfect one in the beginning. It's nice to have a place where you can measure yourself to see where you're going.
Absolutely. I think one thing I'll add in on my soapbox is, the more that schools and districts and at the state level we're able to disaggregate data around who's engaging in CS classes, I think the better picture we can have on what's working and where we need to focus our attention. And there's a lot of opportunity to space that out. It's really clear from all of the answers across our panel that this needs to be a team effort. And there are a few groups that we haven't discussed in detail yet. I think about parents and the broader business and industry community. So I'd love to spend a little time talking about how we can build strong partnerships across these stakeholders that stay aligned to working towards equity in the classroom. Nisreen, can you start off by sharing what effective partnerships between schools and industry can look like from your perspective?
Absolutely. It's such a great question, Jake. So I will speak first on the experiences that we have, because there are some partnerships that happen between the industry and the school districts. But I'll start at a higher level of education between colleges and universities and the industry through mentorship programs, through internships, etc. So to begin with, it's one of the important things to understand is that you have to have incentive for a company or for a campus or a university, or even for a parent. Any stakeholder needs to have an incentive to participate in a strategy or a plan, and they need to understand where it's going to take them and understand the why, the how, the what of how this program is going to work. So from my experience, I'll go back, 10, 15 years ago when I was working at the university. We started a workforce program for our computer science team, not just to work within the university, but to grow the students out and create mentorship and training programs for the students to go out into the community and work with the different local businesses. That really took a lot of effort and a lot of people to champion the effort between local government, people on the business side that might not be the business leaders or the business owners, but people who are invested in that community to bring that effort forward and connect, their passions and what they want to see in their community to keep these businesses and to stay in that community. One of the hurdles that businesses have, so I want to bring it back to what it looks like from the industry side. What we look for is it's hiring people who are skilled, who we know that they're going to show up to work and they're going to be invested in their work. And that is difficult sometimes. It's definitely difficult for small businesses when we're looking at engineers. Because a lot of engineers, when they go, especially in software and programming, when they graduate college, they're looking at big companies. They're looking at Google and IBM and Facebook and Amazon. They're not looking for a small, startup, or they're not looking for a local company. They want to see themselves in a bigger place. So connecting with the universities and the colleges for these local businesses and the small businesses has been a key thing to bring those students and to invest in them as interns. They're, cheaper for the business, and also there are other incentive programs and that we can work with the local government and with the school, and to split that difference. And then once they get invested in that product that they're building and you provide them with a good environment, then you can see them stay. And when they stay, they are excellent for the business because they're already starting with you. They already know your environment and your culture, and you're invested in them, so they stay with you longer. That's something that we definitely also adapted at Babel Street, and I see it across the industry, especially for small businesses where if they're in a university environment, they connect with the university, they connect with the computer science department, and they start bringing those people in as they finish their classes, as they connect with the community. Other ways that we look at partnership with the community is that, again, we're looking for talent. The industry is going to look for talent. We're looking for the next team member that is going to join our team and make a difference in our organization. So when we participate in events, for example, whether they're hackathons that the universities or colleges put on, or robotics teams that are competitions, we're sponsoring these events to look for that, to build the culture and to also look for those talents so that we can bring the next person that we need on our team. So those are the incentives that the industry is looking for. So you can take that and work backwards into like, how can we bring this into the school district? And a lot of times, one of the most successful things that I've seen are participating in bigger, whether it's a national thing like Coding for America or Coding for NASA. There's a lot of hackathons that happen throughout the year that a lot of industries participate in, and that really makes a difference for the students and shows the students and the parents the direction and the path to have a successful job, because a lot of jobs these days are in the software industry, and there is a lack of talent that, we're looking for more people. We want people to get educated in computer science and start in that direction. And from that need, you can start seeing that there's a lot of coding boot camps that started without even having to go to college or a university or get at that level of education. I'm seeing a lot of people who are going through coding schools that are specific, and those coding schools are partnering with the industry. So you take someone who's just finishing high school and put them into these boot camps and these programs, and then you're connecting them directly with the industries and the companies that that school is partnering with. And that creates a mentorship program. It creates a flow of talent that is, specific and is learning what that company and industry and the newest trends in coding and the newest trends in the, whether it's AI, which is the buzzword these days, and also data science is another thing that we look at. These are not new concepts. They're just becoming a lot more popular, and there's a lot more emphasis on those. So we're starting to see the trends change from just focusing on programming into focusing on areas of specialization, whether it's data science or artificial intelligence, etc., and pushing those through the industry. So effective partnership starts with an incentive, and it starts with people who champion the cause and take on the bigger challenge of connecting and networking with people. So the successes that I've seen are places where there is a cycle of feedback. So we get students into our company, and the feedback between us and the university has to continue, or the college or the school that is teaching those students how to code. There needs to be a feedback to understand, it's not just about the skills in coding. A lot of people can learn that, but there's more to that. There are, life skills that the students need to learn, especially for someone who's coming, from high school, or just fresh out of college or community college or university. The life skills that we see that are missing, for example, are things that can be taught at any place. Showing up on time, being there, at the right time for your meeting, being prepared, being able to listen and connect with other people. These are skills that, we try to build in, but if someone comes in with that skill, they have a higher success rate in our environment because they show us that they care and they're motivated and they want to learn and they ask questions. So that's the feedback cycle that we're looking for in order to keep the people that we're investing in. So and that goes back, like I said, incentive is first for a lot of us. What am I getting out of this, right? If I'm investing in this college or this, student or this new employee, well, we want to work together in order to create an environment that fosters more innovation and brings a lot more learning and tools to all of us. So I think that captures a lot of the things that without going into more detail, I think connecting, networking, and championing the cause, and taking on those risks of investing in our local community and local schools is the key of like creating the next generation that can, we show the students how the industry works and what we're looking for, and they can take that back to their classrooms, and the teachers can then cater to these needs and build. So that connection between teachers, industry leaders, as well as the students need to keep flowing.
Thank you, and I really want to you highlight the importance of establishing the right incentives and having someone take the leadership and make those connections and build that network. And I really admire the way that CS4ALL has acted as a hub to build connections just like this across many stakeholders and industries. Ruth, can you share some ways you've seen effective partnerships across multiple stakeholders?
Sure. So since much of our audience today is educators in schools, and often we get in our own bucket and we kind of hang out with our friends, and so it can be a little daunting for schools to go out and get those partnerships. So a couple of years ago, I published a blog that was 5 easy ways and 1 hard way any tech company can support computer science education movement, and I was specifically focusing on what are things that companies can do that are going to fit with their business objectives? So I think one thing that's really important is everybody should do what they do best, because when the rubber meets the road and things get tough, anything that's not in your wheelhouse is going to get left to the side. So some of the partnerships I like to share and encourage the education leaders in Connecticut to think about. One, don't think only about the top of mind companies. Any company with 2 floors has software engineers. And oftentimes smaller companies can be a lot more accessible in terms of opportunities for your students or your classrooms to engage, because they're not big enough to have created great big systems for engaging with the community. So that's one strategy, is like, it could be a tire distributor, it could be a mail order company, it could be retail. Airports, they all have technology and technology professionals in those organizations. When it comes to supporting your students, you need to think about the 360. What is the surround around your kids, and how do you make sure that those other influencers in their lives are on board with your mission? So one of my favorite partnerships is a partnership in Connecticut, West Virginia, between the Partnership of African American Churches and the local university to bring computer science to girls of color. Faith-based communities are often left out. Do you have large church communities? These are all influencers in the children's lives. Public housing facilities, Boys and Girls Club, Girl Scouts, out of school time. So think beyond your, let's all call Google to get help, or let's all call the big bank that we know about, and think about a broader set of stakeholders. And then, of course, do not forget parents. Recent research from STEM Next has shown that parents and parent engagement is one of the most important things we can do. And just for like a reality check on that parent engagement piece, virtually all the parents today did not take this as kids. So we really need to make sure that they're on board, because we're asking those kids to go home and do homework, and the parents may or may not feel comfortable supporting them. So I really encourage you to check out the STEM Next resources on family engagement, about ways to make sure that all parents, especially those that don't have a background in technology, can engage.
It's so important that you bring up parents and caretakers for students, and sort of open this up to the broader group. Have any of you seen really effective ways to engage parents in the work in your school communities?
Yeah, I'll be glad to jump in. Student and family community engagement is huge, right? It is not an add-on. It is not something that you think about after you've created your CS plan. It is something that has to be part of the beginning of your CS plan, because all of us in CS know that folks still don't understand what computer science is. They don't even understand if there's a connection between CS and computational thinking. So there's an awareness piece that doesn't just happen for our educators in our schools and our students, but also our parents, because they should be empowered to be able to understand what it is and also how to navigate their child's journey within it and advocate for resources for their child. Because if you don't know what it is, how do you make us think about, how do you write letters, and how do you get angry if computer science or computational thinking experiences are not happening in your classroom? So I would simply say that it should exist in the beginning, and every single school that we support in New York City who is in a current year with us has to think about how student and family community engagement is going to live within their program offerings.
Great. Well, thanks, Ron. And if others want to come back to this, feel free to jump in. But I'm going to switch over to some of the key questions that folks have been throwing in the app. And audience, please feel free to continue adding there. One I will start with that is a hard one for anyone to answer is, in schools that have done hard work to try to build toward sustained equity in their building, how can they work to keep that going while they're in distance learning? How can we support continuing that? Does anyone want to jump in and share ideas you've seen in this new environment?
Well, I'll jump in. I think the obvious thing is digital divide, right? We have to make sure that all kids actually have the ability to join those virtual classes. And I think Ron and Lynn can speak more to this, but not only are they able to join those classes, but do they also have a space where they are able to focus on those classes? And, or are they, for example, being charged with taking care of other siblings and distractions, other things like that? And this is a big issue. I know New York City, ran at that digital divide issue really quickly, but it's plaguing the students across the nation. So unfortunately, I don't have a solution for that other than making sure that ensuring that every student actually can access the resources.
And I'll add to that there's a piece that complements thinking about the digital divide, which is the equitable practices piece, right? It doesn't matter if we're in remote learning or inside of a classroom, the practices of equity can translate to your digital world. So as Ruth said, are you still thinking about what my students in my classroom have already had to go through and what are they going through now? Are you thinking about how you're still going to make sure my different type of learners have the appropriate piece of technology? Doesn't mean just put them all in Google Classroom. It's doing what you did in your classroom. What do I need to do that's a complement to the main approach to education so that everyone can access that? It's simply going through our normal list of things that a good educator does to make sure that their classroom is culturally relevant and they're also reaching all students. So I think the translation, there isn't a new silver bullet for it. It's around good practice.
It is such an important point. Go ahead, Ruth.
It's Lynn. I wanted to add to that as well, too, that this whole distance learning, we are learning as we go, really. A lot of school systems are learning as they go because this is something that they haven't had to do before. Some schools have, but many, many schools have not. And I think that investing in other types of resources too, like perhaps counselors, to be part of, everyday instruction is needed in these challenging times, and perhaps investing in more training for teachers to become instructional coaches as well, to help support their peers and each other in during challenging times. And I think it's making decisions about those kinds of structures that can, help provide the best educational environment, whether it's in person and or virtually for students. But I agree with Ruth and Ron. I mean, this digital divide thing, it's still unbelievable that we haven't been able to solve for that today. And we really need to make a big push to do that. But in the meantime, these other, structural type of decisions, counselors, and instructional coaches and a support system for both students and teachers, I think is very much needed as well.
And final thing I would add is that this is an opportunity, right? We have laid bare the fact that our children are not going home to an equal amount of access and opportunity to play with technology and learn. And so really need to think about how we think about school when we do go back, and making sure that these inequities have been addressed at the structural level. And we cannot make assumptions that everyone has the opportunity to spend hours on a device every night playing with things online and teaching themselves. I mean, kids deserve teachers who will teach them, and it's not their job to teach themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're really learning so many structural challenges in education, and I'll also add in thinking about some of the opportunity here. I've spent a long time trying to advocate for CS in schools and systems, and often am told why it can't happen. And this is the first time I have ever seen everything be on the table. And all of a sudden, we're talking about really big changes, and it is a chance to make sure we include computing and computer science in the way we rebuild school when we go back. Another question that came from the audience. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I want to add another side of the story. As we encountered COVID, and everything, like you said, is on the table. It's also on the table for the industry to see it and to participate in solving the problem. Because one of the things that this exposed to us, because I mean, there's no separation of like work and life these days. And there is really no separation between work and life. But a lot of the people who work like me in the industry are also parents and are seeing this divide and seeing how it's reflecting and starting to understand. It's really exposed to us where the weak points are and why we're not seeing more people take on the challenges of going into computer science and into programming, and the lack of these opportunities for the students. So I think a positive side of this is that the problem is exposed for enough people to start putting their problem-solving hats on and try to solve this problem for everybody. And our company, especially for our engineering team, is a virtual company. And so we've been on this for a long time. And one of the biggest things I would say to connect is the personal connection. We used to have meetings, but I know like for schools, like especially for students and teachers to be there together, it's really been a difficult time for everyone. And the one thing that I would leave everyone with is to network and to connect with other teachers and with other students, and to ask the students also to check on their fellow students, because that's what really creates the communication cycle, and it also opens us up to understanding and knowing where we can help most. So I think, like you said, it's an opportunity for learning and also for problem solving, because it opened this problem for everyone to see and to participate in the solution.
Absolutely. I want to get one more question from our audience that I've heard actually many times from folks in Connecticut. And Lynn, I'm going to pose this to you, and maybe you can share how you've seen folks in schools that the Constellation Center works with address this. But often math is positioned as a barrier to access for computer science. And I'd love to hear sort of how that can be addressed. Is it necessary? Are there ways to work around that, or change those requirements completely?
Yeah, that's a great question. We do very often see math requirements being used as a very direct barrier to allowing students an opportunity to enter in computer science, particularly into the advanced computer science courses. And while it is recommended that students have experience in, certain levels of algebra, the mistake that I believe we make is, believing that those students that have those experiences are the only ones that can excel or succeed or should have the opportunity entering into those computer science courses. And very often than not, those students are students of color, and they are our young, bright female students that, have this misperception that because they may not excel in math, then they're not going to excel in computer science. That is a huge mistake that we make. So I think, to mitigate that, we need to couch computer science as a way to connect with other disciplines. Computer science isn't just, to learn how to program, though that is, a major part of it, but the computational thinking skills that are obtained or gained in computer science can apply across disciplines, across math, across science, across our fashion and entertainment industry, across our music industry as well, and not sort of pigeonhole it as something that everybody needs to have math first before they can learn computer science. That is absolutely not the right way to do that. And in the schools that we've been working with, we have actually seen, I believe, because of a combination of the approaches that we've taken to teaching computer science, we have seen students have an increase in self-confidence and be able to apply sort of that self-confidence in other courses and other disciplines as well. So my advice is to not use that as an excuse or as a barrier for students to enter into computer science.
Dave, can I jump on this one really quickly?
Yeah, please do.
This idea of mathematics, and I think you said it perfectly, right? Is really around barriers. And I hope that we're all willing to acknowledge on this call that computer science has a history of creating barriers, right? There's the beautiful part of computer science, which is I can create whatever I want, but there's also this very exclusive barrier-based piece of computer science. And I just want to share a very personal story of being a Black male in college, deciding that I was going to major in computer science, only to drop the major because of all of the institutionalized barriers that existed. Funny thing is, I ended up working at IBM for 2.5 years after dropping the major, and now I'm the executive director of computer science. I do not have a CS degree, but understand that the barriers that were set up by the institution at least a decade and a half ago made it where I did not get that degree. Imagine how many students are told they don't have the math prowess, who are told they don't belong in a CS class, and never get the opportunity to take it further. It is a crime if we think about these barriers and huge quotation marks as the reason why we can't do CS in our building.
I love Ron.
I will
okay, I'm just gonna say, I love Ron and all of his passion. It's an awesome way to end this panel. I do want to say one thing that I think is really important. Is we have to understand that much of our college pathways historically have been built to narrow the aperture, to filter people out. Who are the best of the best, and how do we move them forward? So there's all these ways that we're looking to identify and filter students, and those are rife with bias. Driven mostly by your circumstances, the zip code you were born in, and the resources your family has. And so I have, in many cases, come across these various competitions. You look at the science fairs, they're all about let's find the best of the best. But what we really want is everyone to feel welcome and everyone to have a foundational understanding so that when they progress into adulthood, they can make a conscious choice whether or not they want to go into this field. It's about opening doors for everyone. And we really need to take our brain model away from this narrow, like, let's find the elite, to a broad, let's educate everyone so that they can make those choices.
Yeah.
So yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we are coming up on time, and I want to make sure everyone on the panel has a chance for sort of a last word. So I'm going to just go around with a quick 45-second closing thoughts from each panelist. Nisreen, can you kick us off? Anything you want to share with our audience?
Definitely. I'm going to jump and, and follow up on what everyone is saying. From a practical way, on an average day, coding, I rarely use math. I use math if I am developing a game, for example, as a side project, or if I'm doing a research, or even in AI, I rarely use math. So that feedback needs to go back into our pathways into succeeding in computer science. As a science, you might need math in some places, but practically you don't really need math that much. It's a good, a life skill to have some math, and you'd use some basic math on a regular day while you're working, but not at all. I love the partnerships with coding academies and coding schools, because they are focused on the language and teaching the coding skills. And then I love this panel, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here to learn from everyone and to understand further the challenges that everyone is facing, especially at this time this year. And I look forward to taking all this feedback and trying to build it back into our corporate environment and expanding it through our network into other partners and industry leaders. So thanks for having us.
Thank you. And Ruth, you're up next.
I guess I'm next. Yeah, sure. So I think I said my big passion piece a few minutes ago, but one thing I wanted to just leave everyone with is just remember that you are not your target audience. And control of systems don't really any longer reflect the people that are in the system. 50% of students in this country are on free lunch. More than half of kids are non-white. So you've got to spend your time doing the market research and getting to know your kids and their families and their communities. You can't just say, we built something and the kids just didn't sign up. They weren't interested. No, you were not interesting. And you really need to take that to heart, that you've got to do the market research and make sure your kids are going to be attracted to the things you have to offer.
I guess I'll just jump in next. 45 minutes timing and shut you down. One, we know that is the history of what CS is, so acknowledge it. Let's make sure that we remember that computational thinking is part of computer science, and that K-12 should be how you're thinking about the approach. It can't just start in high school. It needs to happen before that. Equity and reach and diversity are not necessarily the same thing, but reach and diversity are part of equity. And I just want to leave you with this key piece, which is, if you're going to talk about equity, you also have to be willing to talk about these specific things, which are race, racial literacy, social emotional learning, project-based learning, universal design for learning, translanguaging, and this idea of activism is huge, and you got to get there. And if you want to learn more, and just kind of learn what we're doing in New York City, knowing that we don't have the answer for everything, check out our equity website, which is CSforALL.nyc/equity.
Okay, so I'll go next. Here are my final thoughts. At the Constellation Center, we're paying very close attention to how racial and economic segregation has made it onto mainstream conversations, not just through protests that are happening across America, but in our own living rooms, in our kitchen tables. And when it comes to CS education, we know that because, we've seen it here, even, in Georgia Tech's own backyard and across the nation, that so many students of color and poor and rural students are locked out of these critical skills. And I believe that the lack of access is going to continue to deny them entry to certain colleges and to the tech workforce. And even more dangerous, it's going to continue to marginalize them at greater levels of impacts than we can imagine, because they will not have the skills to thrive or succeed in a technologically advanced society that we are becoming. And the ethics around that are astounding, since technology not only shapes how we think, it guides what we choose to believe and how we behave. And so I'm not, this is about equity in computing, and it's, equity in the tech workforce, but I'm talking about equity in every aspect of our society, from law to healthcare to policy, all of which is impacted by advances in technology. So I urge us all to push the discipline forward to meet these demands and get our kids ready for a society that they can thrive in.
Absolutely. Well, I will quickly just say a huge thank you to this panel and to the organizers, and turn it back over to Susan for the rest of a wonderful day. Thank you all.